Case File A001-1, the night of the androids. It was the summer of 1973 and I was 18 at the time. My cousin Tony and I were out late on a Friday night and we decided to get a six-pack of beer, sit on the front steps of the nearby elementary school, and quench our teenage summertime thirst. We hadn't been there very long when we both heard the rumble of a very loud car approaching. As it came into view, we saw that it was a 1959 Cadillac convertible, the one with the huge fins. It was moving no more than about 10 miles an hour, and it was apparent that the car had no muffler. We watched it as it passed, wondering why such an unusual old car would be cruising through our neighborhood after midnight. The car disappeared up the street, however, and we soon turned our attention to other things. After a while, we got tired of sitting, so my cousin and I got up from the school steps and decided to walk. We rounded the side of the school building and found ourselves on a dark side street with no street lights and few houses. We hadn't gone very far when, again, we heard the sound of that loud engine. About a quarter of a mile up the street, a pair of headlights swung toward us. Both my cousin and I froze. The side of the street on which we'd been walking was wooded, so we slowly edged back into the tree line and waited. The car approached and, as it slowly passed us, we could see it contained a man driving, a woman next to him in the front passenger seat, and a small boy in the back seat. The street was dark, but their faces were illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights. My cousin and I agreed afterwards that none of the three moved the entire time we had them in sight. They said nothing, heads never moved, facial expressions didn't change, they were absolutely like mannequins. The Cadillac disappeared down the street and we never saw it again. Being teenagers out late, this freaked us out a bit. We decided that we'd had enough for one night, so we headed for home. As we rounded the block, a police car approached us. The car stopped and the officer asked us what we were doing out so late. Then he asked us if we'd seen anything unusual. Of course, at this point, we spilled our whole story. He calmly explained that the car contained a family of bicycle thieves. Somewhat relieved, we continued home. After a bit, I thought it seemed awfully convenient that the police officer pulled up when he did to offer a prosaic explanation for what had been a very weird experience. You have to wonder what kind of parent would take their kid out for a night of larceny. Yes, there are some really dysfunctional families out there, but this just seemed too bizarre. It only occurred to me later that we had seen no bicycles in the car. The trunks on those caddies are huge, but I don't recall that the trunk lid was even ajar, at least not obviously so. So, if they were bicycle thieves, they must not have had any luck. To this day, I remember how eerie it was to see these motionless people driving down that dark street. If they were looking for bikes, don't you think they would have been scanning yards to see if some kid left one on the front lawn? Instead, all three of those people sat bolt upright, looking straight ahead. You would at least expect the kid to be moving around, but as long as we had them in sight, he never did. My cousin and I still discuss the incident from time to time, and we still don't quite know what to make of our night of the androids.
Case File A001-2. The odds. I live in a moderate-sized borough in Pennsylvania. I live in the same house where I grew up. In fact, most of the neighborhood has remained the same for the past 20 years or so. This includes the family that lives across the street. This family, who I refer to as the odds, is not normal by any stretch of the imagination. There is the husband and wife who are in their 70s and their daughter, Carol, who is now my age, 52. They have lived there as long as I can remember. Carol and I went to school together, though we barely knew each other. She has always been very attractive, though I never recall her ever having a boyfriend or girlfriend. Her parents maintain a very nice house and seem to get along quite well together. In fact, Carol and her parents are always a trio. They are never seen separate. They do not go to church and are not involved in any civic activities. But this isn't the strange part. Every spring since I can recall, they dig up a huge hole in the backyard. It's in the same location every year. The size I estimate is about 15 x 10 foot and about 4 foot deep. As soon as the hole is dug, they cover it with a huge tarp that is staked into the ground around the perimeter. It remains like that for 2 days, and it is quickly filled in and topped with new turf. Every year, it's almost like a harbinger of spring. The odds are digging the hole. The odds don't talk to anyone. Never. Carol never talks to anyone. I have only heard her voice on a few occasions, and that was when we were in class together, and she'd be answering the teacher. I attempted to talk to her a few months ago during the holidays and she simply looked at me, smiled and said nothing. I have never heard her parents say anything. That brings up another point. Carol doesn't look anything like her parents. She must be adopted, or, as I suspect, something else is going on here. I remember when I saw the movie The Truman Show. That is the odds. Everything stays the same. One summer I took a photograph of a family member in our front lawn. In the background was the odds' front yard and house. A few years later I was looking at the photograph and was amazed at how similar the house, shrubbery and flowers were at the present time. It looks like the flowers came up the same way a few years later. They seem to follow a routine for each day of the week, but the one thing they do every morning is really strange. The three of them tour the outside of the house. There are specific places on the perimeter of the house where they stop, hold hands in a circle and look into the sky. It's very strange, because each time they perform this ritual I get a static feeling in the hands and feet. It affects my mother the same way, even when we are not watching them and somewhere else. There are other oddities as well. None of them has a job, no one ever visits, and they get a lot of deliveries. It seems like every day something comes. I'm convinced that these people are not entirely human. I know it sounds nutty, but I'm not the only person in the town that thinks that something nefarious is going on with the odds.
Case File A001-3. The Strange Smiths. I grew up in a bedroom community outside of New York City. It was the 1970s and all the fathers in the neighborhood commuted to work, while our mothers were stay-at-home moms. All the moms were busybodies and basically had their noses in each other's business. The talk of the neighborhood was the family that lived beside us, the Smiths. The Smiths were very strange. There was Mr. and Mrs. Smith who looked like they were in their 40s and their kids, a son and a daughter. The kids were early teens and we never knew their names. They didn't go to school so we assumed they were homeschooled. The only time we saw them was when the whole family would walk single file to the garage in the back of their house and drive away in their Rambler station wagon. My mom talked to Mrs. Smith once right after they moved in, but that was it. They never answered the door and there was no telephone listing. Mr. Smith never drove to work and Mrs. Smith was never seen shopping or doing any chores. The yard work was taken care of by two men who would drive up in a gray service truck once a week during the spring and summer. They would cut the lawn and trim the hedges. There were no flowers or trees, no lawn furniture, nothing. One of our neighbors called the mayor's office about the kids in school, but we never saw anyone ever come to the house. In fact, they never received mail, the postman told us, and there were never any deliveries. The Smiths lived there for about 4 years. We didn't even know they had left until another, normal, family moved in. They told us that the house had been on the market for several months, and that it was purchased through a government auction, but that seemed strange as well.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.